A long-standing landmark of the city of Anoka, this particular site's future has become somewhat of a hot topic. But what really went on behind these walls? Well, in this episode, we get to talk to experts, former staff, and even patients of what was originally known as the Anoka Asylum, as we learn all about what came to be known as the Anoka State Hospital in this episode of It's Your History. First, it was seen as a boon for the economy, but then later it was viewed as a potential threat to the community. How did that happen? What are the events that shaped the history of this Anoka State Hospital?
The community of Anoka has always had a long, complex relationship with the Anoka State Hospital since the hospital was built, both in very much needing the other very much, which can cause for a lot of tension and strain. The city of Anoka very much wanted the hospital built. They saw it as an economic engine. They saw it as an employer in the area. And to understand all of that, you have to go back to what was going on in the state hospital system in 1896. Massive overcrowding in the 3 state hospitals that were part of the state hospital system, St. Peter, Rochester, and Fergus Falls. All of them were overcrowded. Fergus Falls was planning on expansion, but even with those plans, they wouldn't compensate the current population. And so there was a desire to have more facilities, and they wanted one that was closer to the Twin Cities area. And so we saw Anoka and Hastings immediately come out front as the front runners for this, and it was called the Minnesota Civil War. This fight between Anoka and Hastings to have it, and it was a fairly long and complex process because both wanted it. There's a lot on the line here, and so in 1895, September of 1896, the governor of Minnesota appointed a commission to decide which of these cities would get it. And they had a lot to go on. They had a certain dollar amount, and they wanted something that would be, as we said, close by. What Anoka had going for it, what it was putting forward as the reason why it should be chosen, was that it was on the travel route between Duluth and the Twin Cities, so it could serve both of those large communities. It had railway service. It also had suitable agricultural land nearby, and enough land because farming was a big part of these hospitals. It was a part of what the patients did later for therapy, but also just for self-sustaining. The food raised there would feed the populations there, and also they would sell it, and so the revenue from that would go back towards the cost of operating the hospital. So Anoka had a lot going for it, and the initial decision was that it would go to Hastings. And this happened right before Christmas in December of 1896. And what happened was that there was a vote and it went towards Hastings. But with the holiday, like what happens with a lot of us, they didn't file the paperwork. They're like, well, we'll do that after Christmas. And somebody on the commission changed their mind. And so they voted again after Christmas. And this time the vote went to Anoka. Now, of course, Hastings was upset about this because they thought they had it. And so the fight continued. And it continued for a couple of years. It went to the state legislature, but the legislature only met every 2 years at that point. So when there wasn't a resolution in one session, they'd have to wait another couple of years before the next one. Ultimately, what happened was that there was a compromise between Hastings and Anoka, and both of them got it. That was the way that they settled. It seems like a fair way to do it. Those that see the state hospital buildings today see that they remark on the architecture. And what they see is the cottage style. And the man responsible for those buildings, though not necessarily for the idea of the cottage design, was Clarence H. Johnson, who was the state architect in Minnesota at the time. He was the architect from 1901 to 31. And this is a time when the state government is expanding quite a bit. And so we're seeing quite a bit of, we see lots of buildings from Johnson across the state. Many of them are gone now. So this is a fine example of one of the great architects in the state of Minnesota right here in the community of Anoka. And so they do what's called the cottage style. And what this is it's not just an architectural style, but this is coming from the people that are trying to design the hospital and the way they want it to work. And it's a direct reaction to the way that hospitals had been built, mental hospitals and other hospitals had been built at the time, as these large institutional types of places. When many people think of a state hospital or a mental institution, and they bring together the horror movie sorts of things, and it's a large sort of imposing Gothic style, and they're probably picturing what's called the Kirkbride style, which was actually in use in Minnesota in Fergus Falls, which was the hospital built a couple of decades before the Anoka and Hastings ones were. And so what the cottages are, they're trying to bring it down to a much more home-like environment. Now, if you've ever been there, these are still really large, imposing buildings, but they're nowhere near what the other buildings were, and they're trying to make this home-like environment. So they've got multiple buildings. They're on a circular campus, so there's a beautiful courtyard in the central area there. And the Anoka ones specified that the buildings would be no more than 2 stories tall. How they define 2 stories, I sort of see them as 4 stories, but they're 2 full stories with a garden level and then a partial story on top. They're large buildings, no doubt about it, because they have to be. They're still treating a large number of people, but they're trying to bring that scale down. And a lot of this comes out of the idea of the progressive era, which was the sort of philosophical idea at the time, which was talking about the way government operated and the way that institutions operated as well. And it's this rejection of large institutional things. And so this is very much a part of not only just the way the buildings look, but the way they wanted to treat the people there as well.
Truly amazing to get a broad view of a history of a hospital that seemed to grow and advance right along with the state of mental health itself. Coming up next, we'll get a chance to talk with some people who had boots on the ground as we talk to the professionals, staff, and even some doctors of the Anoka State Hospital when It's Your History returns.
QCTV is an award-winning community media center.
We inform citizens about the actions of their city governments.
We connect residents to the events and activities happening in their own backyard.
We engage others to provide local programming to our Channel 15.
We innovate, offering live event coverage via our website and on-demand streaming of regular programs.
We collaborate with local organizations for important community conversations.
Most importantly, QCTV tells the stories that matter to the people who live, work, and play in the communities of Andover, Anoka, Champlin, and Ramsey.
Hey, I'm just leaving now. Can you text me the details? Thanks.
If you want to know how an operation is run, you talk to the people in charge. Stay tuned as we talk to the former staff of the Anoka State Hospital.
There was about 10 cottages, I think, and in those cottages they lived, the patients, as they had them according to their age, I think, some of them, and one of them was an infirmary. The whole building was sick, physically sick people, and the ones that had surgery were in that unit.
Well, the huge number of patients that were here when I came, the numbers were well over 1,000, and they're just packed in the bunks in the dorms were three high. They also had one of the most efficient way to get people showered. There was this, you went in one door, took off all your clothes, went down this shower stall with sprinkler heads, and at the other end you got a towel and some clean clothes, so that they could do the whole job very efficiently. And that kept the cost way down.
At that time, EST, electroshock therapy, was very prevalent, and the law required an MD to pull the trigger, so the nurses would get the patient set up. As I recall, 3 days a week they did do electric shock treatments, and the nurses would get patients all set up. As I recall, they would have 15 to 18 patients per session, and then it was my duty as an MD to pull the trigger on the machine. I particularly was not proud of my job of pulling the trigger on giving people electric shock, because in my experience it was used but commonly punitively. When the nurses would decide that somebody was acting up, it was used as a punishment rather than as a treatment.
I know they gave a few electric shocks, but not too many when I was there.
They were fearful of it. They assumed that it was given as a punishment rather than as a treatment. And it was a rather crude, convulsive treatment, and there were side effects. Sometimes people with the convulsion that ensued did suffer some side effects, even fractures even though they were held down, there was some fractures that occurred, spinal fractures.
The community of Anoka, there was tremendous animosity, maybe fear. And one of the employees on grounds had a husband who was in the police department. And so every rumor and there were lots of rumors, it would instantly find its way into the town of Anoka.
So many of the people working, the nurses, the aides, the people in the maintenance lived right in Anoka. As I recall, it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, employer in the town at the time. But I had no real contact other than the people that were living in Anoka and working at the hospital. I had no contact with people in Anoka who were not working at the hospital as to what their attitude was, whether there was any fear of patients escaping or doing any harm. And during my 4 months, or as I say, I was there only 4 months, there were no problems that I recall of anybody escaping and doing any harm or doing anything in the town itself that caused any alarm. Although the newspapers subsequently, as I recall, had some issues of people wandering in the town and creating some fear among the occupants who did not work at the hospital. But I had no particular personal knowledge of any of that.
Hearing from some of the doctors at the time really puts a lot of things in perspective. Want a completely different perspective? Then sit tight, and after the break when we return, we'll talk to some of the former patients at the Anoka State Hospital on It's Your History.
Thanks for watching QCTV. I'm Lisa Monsrud, and I want to invite you to watch our local programs right here on QCTV. We do several monthly shows that you may find interesting. The Chamber Report is hosted by Pete Turok and it features local businesses from our area. You will be up to date with what is going on in our community, thanks to Pete. Also, the District Court Show is hosted by Judge Steve Halsey, and it features judges and lawyers who talk about topics that affect us all. We also produce the Sheriff Show, and Sheriff James Stewart and his staff keep us up to date on what is going on with the Sheriff's Department. News and Views is all about what is happening in our 4 city halls. You will meet the mayors, city council officials, as well as city employees telling us what we need to know. And the Public Safety Show informs us on what is happening at the fire and police departments in our community. So if you like local news, you will love QCTV. Again, thanks for watching QCTV.
Getting to know about the day-to-day operations from some of the former staff of the hospital is one thing, while getting to know about it from some of the former patients is something entirely different. Well, that's what we're about to do as we talk to some of the former patients of the old Anoka State Hospital next.
You spent your time doing school. It was a structured activity thing to keep you out of trouble, pretty much. So I think it was just designed to, we have staff, if you do get in trouble, and I had one incident, I spent time in an area, it was a seclusion, it was a small room. There was a metal cot with a mattress that was an inch thick for a bed, and a wash bowl or a stool, and that was it.
Pretty much it was more like getting up in the morning. We had to be out of the room area by 8:30. The door's locked, all in the day room, all in the med line. It was more like, go to DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, women's group, journal group, arts and crafts, gym. It was very productive.
And what the state hospital did was save my life. It saved my life. This first psychiatrist literally saved my life. And then the unit I was in was perfect for me because there was people just like me, and they'd throw tables, they'd throw chairs, anything that didn't move. But, and sometimes things that did, but I did not want to get tied down because of my PTSD. I did not want to get tied down. So I didn't act in ways that would get me tied down. There was a room in the back, and anytime somebody goes off, they have to bring it back there, and they need 2 nurses back there at one time. Okay, so there's only 4 nurses on duty, all right? So anytime that knocks down half the staff, and anytime somebody acts out and makes a suicidal gesture, about 15 others do or want to. And you can't really pay people to work there. It was people just like me.
No, I didn't know how long I'd be there because I remember they picked me up from the group home I was at, and I was just shocked because I got in the sheriff car and they just said grab whatever, and I'm thinking okay. And I remember as I got up in the state hospital grounds and I entered the Miller North building, I talked to the first doctor provider, and it was just like he let me have a cigarette inside, and I had no idea what brought me there, or it was just kind of like, what did I do? You hear all these stories about people coming and never get out, that was running through my mind. I had no idea when I was going to be there, how long.
1 or 2 people, and I won't say myself or not, I'll just say 1 or 2 people had some electrical therapy shock treatments to calm me down.
In some way, yeah, in some way, no. Because there was an incident that occurred and it was never documented, and they forgot about me overnight. In a restraint situation. Broke me down, and I remember 5-point restraints where you're like this, at the sternum of your head and your feet. And the funny part about it happened were late shift, I say. It was never reported, and why I say that because when it happened, they forgot about me. They hurried me upstairs, changed my clothes, and tried to pressure the doctor up my levels and kind of like black me to keep my mouth shut, that kind of thing. But it was very traumatic for me because I was all forgotten about. And it was like I was laying on the ground, 5 staff screaming in my face, breaking me to start taking accountability and just everything you can imagine. And it was lightning. And the thing about that room, some spiritual thing had to happen because it was like either a room that was used for operation, like lobotomy or something, or like shock treatment, because it was just a light that's like a little square you could just see, but there was lightning. And it was very traumatic for me on that matter. I just try not to think about it, but you know, when you're just laying there full of your own urine and stuff, that's pretty sad. It's just because of retaliation. I think it was done because I said something, and it was just kind of a way of saying, all right, you want to get smart mouth, we'll do you. But you know, when your officer was involved, I was more responding.
I did anger groups, relationship groups. I did chemical dependency groups. I did PTSD groups. I did everything I could. I figured if I was stuck there, I was going to work. And I was going to work on me, and I gave myself a chance. I gave myself 6 months. And then they discharged me on March 4th. They kicked me out because I was doing too good. And I fought to stay in. That's how sick I was. You know, I was scared by this point. But they gave me a nurse to help me stay out, and that was awesome because they'll give you a nurse to work with. And she helped me get my meds and stay on my meds. And then when it was June, I went out and got my kids.
Hearing from these patients as well as the staff before them tend to put things in a different perspective. Whispered stories of ancient rumors tend to fade in the light of more altogether realistic and human stories. Coming up next, we'll take the story of the old Anoka State Hospital into the present as we talk to Anoka Planning Director Carolyn Braun and see what she has in store for some of the buildings coming up on It's Your History.
Allison is my friend. We met in school when we were younger and grew up together. We did everything together. Then one day something happened, and people started to tease her, being really mean. At first she would pretend it was no big deal, that it didn't hurt her. But after a while it started to get to her. Her grades started to slip, and she used to be such an awesome student. Then she stopped talking to everyone, even me. Now she's not around anymore, and I miss her so much. Allison was my friend.
One of the big questions on the minds of locals is what's going to happen to the rest of the Anoka State Hospital? Well, Carolyn Braun is the City of Anoka's planning director, and she's got some excellent ideas about how to best put the site to use, as well as serve the community.
I'm joined today by Carolyn Braun, the planning director at the City of Anoka, and Carolyn's going to talk to us about what's going on at the campus of the old Anoka State Hospital today. So Carolyn, thank you very much for joining me today. You and I have been working together on a lot of projects over the years, and it's great to have you come in and join me on It's Your History and talk about a project that I know both you and I are very passionate about, and that's what's going to be happening at the campus of the Anoka State Hospital. For those that don't know, tell me just the very basic. Who owns those buildings right now, and is there anything happening in them at the moment?
Well, and the buildings in particular that we're interested in, but the campus in its entirety is now owned by Anoka County, was a state facility and has been conveyed to Anoka County. And we are interested in buildings 2, 3, and 4 on the campus that are now vacant buildings.
So the whole campus is owned by the county, and then it's human services out there, and one of the county workhouses is out there, and then there's 3 cottages that are...
Well, and there's human services, there's administration functions that are going on there, the workhouse, and then there are buildings that are vacant. The ones that we're interested in are buildings 2, 3, and 4.
So the original cottages, as they were on the, I guess the north end, are some of the administration buildings, and one cottage, then the rest of that ring is the cottages. And so 2, 3, and 4 are the ones that are vacant. One has been gone was taken down some years ago.
Correct.
So you work with the City of Anoka, not the county. So how did the City of Anoka become involved in looking for a use for these cottages?
Well, initially the city was contacted by Anoka County because they were interested in demolishing the buildings, and that requires a demolition permit. We, heard that inquiry and talked to our council members about it, and those buildings are eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. They're not listed, but they're eligible, and the city is interested in preserving those buildings because of that.
And so what types of things has the city talked about finding to put into cottages 2, 3, and 4?
What we've really landed on fairly quickly was housing for veterans. There are 23,000 veterans in Anoka County. There's almost 1,600 of them are 50% disabled, with a quarter of those actually being 100% disabled. And so we do believe that there's a need to provide better housing for veterans. In addition, there's interest at this time, there's funding available to facilitate that. And that's one of the issues when you're rehabbing some of these older buildings, that there's not enough funding available to do it. So we believe that there actually is funding available to do this.
I assume that's the key to all of this. I mean, certainly there's lots of things that those buildings could be used for, either private or public, you know, whatever they might be, bed and breakfast or whatever, but there's got to be a pathway to get there, and this is one that has a reasonable pathway.
And we also have support for that use from the county, and again, it's next to other county uses, so we need to remember that and make sure that it fits within the neighborhood in essence, and the county is supportive of the veterans housing. So it seems to be a reasonable path to go down.
And then within that neighborhood, I mean, there's a workhouse there, and so there's some, you know, whoever moves into cottages 2, 3, and 4 also has to not only fit into what's going on there, but be accommodating of what's already happening
Exactly.
there.
And then the other thing we feel is a plus is we have the VOA facility, which is just across and down the street, and there can be some synergy between the two groups working together that hopefully would be helpful to both groups.
Yeah, they're both right on the rail station. Not that I know it's not a commute. I mean, it's it doesn't go that quickly or that frequently. But yeah, that's I hadn't thought of that. So there's already some great veteran services in the county, and this would
and there's
fit
some
in with
linkages there. It's a fixed route service, commuter rail. So, but that still could get them to, for example, if they had to go to Minneapolis, it could get them. It's also in close proximity to the VA clinic that's in Ramsey.
Yes.
So there's a lot of things going on for this site that would make it work well for veterans.
So what are the next steps in this process? How can we make this happen?
Well, we've had some discussion with private developers. We'll be getting information back from them to gauge your interest. One of the things we have to analyze is what needs to happen to rehab the buildings, and is it feasible financially to do that? And then also we have to have an understanding of what services those veterans would need when they're in the building. So some of the private folks actually provide services for their residents. So we're looking at that and trying to determine what kind of services those might be that would then be provided.
Well, there's a lot happening out there, and there's been a lot that has happened out there at the State Hospital for over the last 100+ years. And so we're interested in seeing not only the history that's been there, but what's happening next. So Carolyn, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll all be watching to see what happens out there.
Well, hopefully it'll be soon.
Yeah, we're looking for a happy ending to this.
With so much momentum behind the initiative and with such great intentions, Carolyn and the people that are working with her are sure to achieve their goals. More of It's Your History after the break.
Teach us how to eat healthy and exercise.
According to the Center of Disease Control, 17% of children and adolescents are obese. Lead by example. Teach your children to eat healthy and exercise.
Get set, go!
From the history to recollections of prior staff and even patients to the modern city staff's plans for the future, this has been our journey through the history of the Anoka State Hospital. Thanks for joining us for another episode of It's Your History. For QCTV, I'm Matt Overstreet.